Welcome to Sound Test. This is Brian, and today we're going to review Kendrick Lamar's newest studio album, Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers. So it's kind of hard to summarize this album, and that's because there's so much that's actually going on in this album. So first off, let me just say this album reiterates why Kendrick is the GOAT. This album is phenomenal from top to bottom. So if you're looking for, whether you should listen to this album or not, or whether you support this, do it. It's a fantastic album. And this is just more so of me just talking about why I love the album and why I enjoyed the album as much as I did. I've probably listened to the album at least like 8 times at this point. It's such a good piece of work, and it's really a culmination of a lot of elements from Kendrick's career and the growth he's had as an artist. All that is just accumulated into this work. And it's a very fantastic package because of that context. So, when it comes to style, at first, when you're first listening to it, it's kind of all over the place. And that's because at the very beginning, each track sounds completely different. And this is kind of why I say it's like a culmination of Kendrick's, past work, because you can kind of hear elements of many different eras that Kendrick had. So, there's some, tracks that feel like they will sound perfect on Damn. There's some tracks that will feel perfect on To Pimp a Butterfly. There's some tracks that have elements from, Black Panther. And, there's some elements, kind of all over the place of little sprinkles and pieces of things that he's done in the past, but, reinstated in a new way or refined in this new way. And, typically Kendrick has some type of overall theme for his albums. And I think the closest thing to say for the theming of this album would be trauma. And it's more so on the trauma that people face, traumas that Kendrick has faced, traumas that are specific to the Black community, as well as a host of other things that, really Kendrick kind of goes into depth on. So let's talk about some of these, different elements that happens. So one of them is from a mental health perspective. And it's not just saying mental health in general. There's times where Kendrick's talking about his specific mental health. It kind of became a meme over the years of when's Kendrick going to drop something? It's been X amount of years since Kendrick has dropped something new. And, Cole has released 3 albums since, Kendrick's last album. And, obviously fans are hungry for more content. And, especially when you're somebody of his caliber, anything you drop, people are going to be hungry for. And, it's kind of the unfortunate aspect of it that, hey, let's say you drop something and then the fans eat it up, they listen to it, and then they're like, all right, what's next? What else you got for me? And, as an artist, that's a kind of weird position to put yourself in, because obviously you put a lot of work into your projects. You put a lot of passion and you put a lot of, time and energy to producing stuff and giving stuff to your fans. And then when they're just so hungry and eager for more, your only options is to, push yourself and produce more stuff, or kind of just lay back and just trying to figure out the difference of quantity over quality. And I feel like that's like a lot of the issues that Kendrick was having, in which there were just things that was going on in his life. There were just things that wasn't having him completely motivated. Like there was one of the tracks where he was like, he had writer's block for 2 years. And in a typical artist, the typical flow is like an album every 2 years. And Kendrick was basically saying for 2 years alone, he was just having writer's block. And then on top of that, just the political discourse that was going on in America, and, the effects of the pandemic and the effects of, just how people are treating each other in this day and age, all of that weighs heavily on somebody. And, when Kendrick is so influential, especially when you think of like To Pimp a Butterfly and how political that album was, and how, ingrained that album was for the African American plight, and, its constant elements of Afrocentrism. And like, he even talks a little bit of that, in the track Savior. And in the track, he's like saying, we are not your savior. You can understand and feel the content that we push out, but we are not the end all be all. If you want change, that's something that you specifically have to do. And he did a line where, that protest is one day for you. That's my 365. And, when it comes to this mental health aspect, there's parts of the album where he's just like, no, I had to go back and find myself. I had to worry about my well-being before I just push out another project. And, he's like, I choose me. I'm sorry. I'm not going to put my well-being on the line just to say I have a new album out, just say I have a new project out. And, as a performing artist, obviously nowhere near this caliber, but as a performing artist, I can completely understand that aspect in which, you're doing so much performances, and, you're being in the public face, and like your performance life is completely different from your personal life. And, as natural as people feel on stage or how they feel when they're performing, when you're performing, you're putting on a persona. You're putting on a different face from, your 100% normal being. And that stuff does get tiring, especially somebody on his level. So I love the fact that he went back and was just like, he addressed, why it's been 5 years since he's last dropped an album. And, the long and short of it was he has to take care of himself. And so, that's one theme that we hear in a few tracks. More particularly, we hear this theme in Mirror. We hear this theme at the very beginning with United in Grief. We hear this in Count Me Out. We hear this in Crown. And like Crown itself is just about, the pressures of being an artist, the pressures of being the artist. And, obviously he's heard these conversations where he's considered the GOAT, the greatest of all time. And the pressures that come with being considered one of the greatest of all time as a rap artist, and, how that affects his mental health. The other element I talked about, said earlier, was trauma. And this album is kind of ripe with trauma. That's the other kind of theming of it. And it's trauma from different aspects and different avenues. So one track, of course, in particular, We Cry Together. And this is trauma from the point of a toxic relationship. And I guarantee you, anybody who hears We Cry Together for the first time just feels completely uncomfortable while listening to that track. And it's just like, it's just an argument. The track is just straight up an argument between a man and a woman in a relationship. And it gets intense. Like it gets to points where, and it's very well written. It's very well written to the point where any and everything they're saying is believable. And the artist Taylor Page, she's doing all of her verses in this kind of like crying, yelling type of voice. And it's like that adds to the emotional impact to everything she's saying. And then like, they're just going back and forth. They're not mincing any words. And like, but like the artistry in that junk is so like powerful. And like, it's first time you hear it, you're like, okay, this is an Alchemist beat. And I checked, it's like, yeah, this is an Alchemist beat. Like the beat is very dark and grimy, with this constant loop going over and over. And like, I just kind of love how raw and emotional that track is, and just how like, cutthroat, both the man and woman is. And then, to the end of the track, they completely like make up, but they're making up just through sex. Nothing was resolved. And that's the, kind of idea of the toxic relationship. Nothing that they were arguing for about was resolved. It was just like sex was the cop out. And, that's obviously just a message for these toxic relationships where two people know that they shouldn't be together. They know that they're bad for each other, but it's that one thing that's keeping them together. And that one thing is not like a, completely virtuous thing. It is just that one aspect of the relationship that's the only strong point, while everything else is just completely off base and, with issues that they need to address, but they refuse to actually address it. So they'll continue to argue. They'll continue to belittle each other just because the sex is good. And, that's one of the aspects of, hey, this is trauma just in a different way. This is relationship trauma, rather than something that we get later with family trauma. So family trauma is another like kind of big, theme into here. And we first see that in the track Father Time. And it's kind of funny because in the beginning of the track, there's a female voice in there saying that you need to go to therapy. And Kendrick is like, man, I don't need no therapy. That junk's fake. And that is an ongoing issue in the Black community, in which we feel that therapy makes us weak, or that therapy is not real, is not a real science, and that, oh, Black people don't need therapy, which obviously is a toxic mindset in itself. And so they're saying this as they go into this whole song about father issues. And, this is Kendrick talking about him having father issues with him actually having a father in his life. And this is from the aspect of, in a way, toxic masculinity, but also in a way of how men are perceived and how fathers are perceived. And so like there's a line in there where he was saying that, somebody in his family died and the father was back at work the next day. And he's just like, somebody that's close to you just passed away. Why are you going back to work so soon? And he's just like, bills don't stop. Somebody's got to produce. Somebody's got to work. Somebody's got to, bring money in. And, part of that is with the aspect of Americans working themselves to death, and that, you can't truly bereave, or you cannot truly take time off, because at the end of the day, bills got to be paid. Nobody's going to give you a handout. Stuff has to be handled. And, that goes back into that kind of aspect of toxic masculinity, where you can't show your feelings. You cannot make your feelings known. And no matter what, you got to make sure that your family is straight. And, feelings be damned, or your mental health be damned. I got to keep on going. And, there's other aspects in that song. And he was talking about how father figures can be a negative and or a positive influence in somebody's life as they're growing up. And then he even says he wonders how people who didn't have a father in their life, how they managed to survive, if he was having such a strained relationship with his father who was in his life. Another, on the opposite end, mother. And there's this song called Mother I Sober. And this is talking about the family trauma that his mother's experienced. And part of this, you know, a lot of elements of this album is very heavy. So let me also say that, like, you definitely got to be in the right mindset to listen to this album. There are some bangers in there. There's some like kind of, you know, traditional popish songs, something like, you know, Rich Spirit, Die Hard, Savior in a way. Those are the more like, you know, radio friendly ish hits. But in Mother I Sober, he's talking about basically somebody who was molested. And this person was his mom. And there's this, you know, it was a family member. And, you know, this person asked, you know, the mom asked, what did this person touch Kendrick? And he was just like, no. And nobody believed him when he said, no, this person didn't touch me. And he didn't understand it as a, you know, young boy. Why was everybody in his family tripping about this? And then that was until he learned later that his mother was touched by this family member. And apparently that, you know, multiple people were, and that nobody believed him when he was like, no, this person didn't touch me. And then flips out around when he learned that he realized that he has addictions, and addictions to women, addictions to drinking and alcohol and you know, drugs. And the flip side with this was that when his mother confronted him about it, he was like, no, you know, I'm not addicted to anything. You know, I'm not on drugs. I'm not on, you know, whatever. And this time it was a lie. And that's, you know, that's like the dichotomy where when he was telling the truth, nobody believed him. But now when he's telling the lie, you know, they just took it at face value. And then, of course, we got to talk about, you know, Auntie Diaries. And, you know, this is this one is a heavy one because it's talking about the LGBT community, as well as transgender. And the whole story and song goes around how basically, you know, Kendrick's aunt became his uncle. And, you know, from the perspective that this aunt basically became gay, and he didn't understand certain elements of that in the younger part of his life and how that affected him later. And, you know, how people were always looking at his aunt weird, and, you know, or how, you know, the things that his aunt did influence him in his life, just like how his, you know, he said that was his first time he saw somebody write a rap or write a rhyme was from his aunt, and how like influential that was to him. And then you took that onto the other, you know, it goes a step further when he's talking about his cousin who, you know, goes through the whole gender change process. And, you know, this is his family. So this is people who he has close ties to, people he's, you know, been with all his life. And it got to the point where he was questioning the aspects of the church in which the church was completely like disowning them, not only disowning them, but like making it a public, you know, public thing about how their family is wrong, family's troubled, and how they got problems going on. And, you know, Kendrick, to him, that was like, that's contradictory. How can you say love thy neighbor, but people in your own congregation, you're segregating and you're making them, you know, making them the evil that you can spew your sermons around. And, you know, the buildup in this song, in Auntie Diaries and Mother I Sober, the buildup in both these songs are phenomenal. And, you know, that's another thing that's very standard about Kendrick is his use of textures. And, you know, it's been kind of like, you know, researched before, like how Kendrick uses different textures in his voice, or how he raps to convey different things, and how it works so much musically. And so in both of these tracks, He starts off more in a mumbling sense, in a kind of monotone voice. And I shouldn't say mumbling, but very monotone voice, and very like just straightforward voice. And then like as the track ramps up, he gets so much more, you know, passion into it. The instrumental itself cranks up, and it goes from something that's droning, and then it starts adding these beautiful elements like the strings, and you feel this buildup. And both tracks end on such a high in terms of like intensity. And you know, even in the song Auntie Diaries, you know, he's talking about how he's using the F word, and F word as in the, you know, slur for gay people. And he was just saying, you know, it was just nothing to them. And as elementary schoolers and middle schoolers, it was just nothing. But then he started to see how that affected, you know, these people in his family, and how they weren't laughing when these jokes were being said, or, you know, how they weren't fully into the things they were saying. And then all that culminated into Auntie Diaries at the end, where he's just like, you know, the cousin's like, oh, it's okay for you to say that word as long as you say, let white people say the N word. And I think that was like the clicking moment. And he was like, I get it now. Or like, you know, something that didn't seem like a big deal for me all these years, and it was quietly affecting you. And then it made sense now to him in that aspect. But, and then, you know, tracks like Mirror and Count Me Out, you know, that's him going through his personal traumas that he was going through for these last few years, and how that's affecting him as an artist and affected his output as an artist, and you know, his perception to the world, and where everybody's just clamoring for more, and just like he's just like, hey, I have a lot going on. But yeah, it's this album is pretty phenomenal. United in Grief is another aspect of that song, where he's just like, hey, he didn't know how to completely like understand his emotions and convey his emotions, or convey his frustration. So you know what, he's like, I grieve different. So, you know, now he's buying cars, now he's buying, you know, mansions and stuff like this. He's buying all these material things that he thinks is going to make him happy, but he realizes, nah, that is not making me happy. I'm still in this negative mind space. I'm still in this terrible mindset. And, you know, that's what aspect he's like, hey, you need to go to therapy. He needed to talk to somebody. He needed to understand why he was feeling the way that he was feeling, and what he needs to do about it mentally to kind of get out of the state. Production wise, this is a completely different, you know, aspect. There's some elements like I kind of felt like Mr. Morale and Savior kind of had a little bit of Black Panther-ish vibes. Die Hard and Purple Hearts could have fit like perfectly into Damn. You know, that's just the styles of those songs. But, you know, it's the tracks are so varied. There's so much different styles going on. There's, you know, beat changes within songs. There's, you know, sometimes there's intro and outro elements. But, you know, it's such a cohesive project in the idea that there's a journey from the beginning to the end of it, and there's not one bad track in there. Like, every track is great. And every track just makes you feel, give you a completely different mood, completely different feel to it. So when you're listening to the track, to this album, man, give it like a few listens. Definitely give it a few listens, because there's a lot going on, and multiple, you know, listen throughs give you different aspects of it, and you kind of see the connective tissue through certain tracks, through other things, and see how they come together. But yeah, Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers, huge fan of this work. Once again, Kendrick shows us why he's the GOAT, and why, you know, why he's taking this time off to produce such a fantastic project, and really shows, you know, his skill and artistry as a hip hop artist, and what he can do with the medium and pushing forward with hip hop music. So, hope you enjoyed this, not even review, more of a discussion of Kendrick Lamar's newest album, Mr. Rowd and the High Steppers. This is Sound Test. My name is Brian. Hope you enjoyed. Catch you on the next one.